I was doing a bit of research and I stumbled across our May of 2024 numbers. And believe it or not, we only had 575 subs last year around this time. Well, believe it or not, we're this close to breaking our May sub record. So Broncos country, if you haven't already, I need you to subscribe. Lock us in as the fastest growing Broncos channel on YouTube. Now, on today's show, the NFL has screwed the Broncos in kind of an unclear way. I'm going to break it all down here on today's video and let you know exactly how Denver can beat what is known as the net rest edge. Welcome into the Broncos Breakdown here by Chat Sports. My name is Moose, and like I said, there's this idea and this kind of new metric the NFL has rolled out. It's called net rest edge, and I believe the Broncos got screwed by it in 2025. Are they going to pay for it, or can they beat it? I'll explain all of that and make it make more sense for you by the end of the video. But let's start off with what net rest edge is. Kind of a mouthful to say. Net rest edge is a measure of the total days of extra rest a team has compared to their opponents over the course of a season. While it may seem insignificant, it's a factor that can't be ignored. So I'm sure you're now wondering, well, give me an example of what net rest edge is. An example is like this, and I use the Chiefs and the Broncos for example. If the Chiefs have a full 7-day bye week ahead of their game against the Broncos, and then Denver plays on Monday night, so the Chiefs have a full bye week, and Denver plays on Monday night. The Chiefs have 14 days to prepare for the Broncos, whereas the Broncos only have 6. 14 minus 6 is 8. So the Chiefs would have a plus 8-day rest advantage, and conversely, the Broncos have a rest edge of negative 8 days. Do you see where we're kind of going with this? It's a simple equation when you start to think about it. You just have to look at it on a week-to-week basis. It's not cumulative. It's all based on week to week. So let's go through what we know so far about where the Broncos stand in this whole net rest edge kind of equation. The Broncos have the 23rd worst net rest edge in 2025, -4. Now, we are tied with Pittsburgh and Chicago with -4 rest days. So this isn't the worst. And believe it or not, the team that has the least amount of net rest days, -19, the Raiders, which we'll touch on in just a little bit. But Denver is currently at the bottom of the pack right now when it comes to net rest edge days. Now, I know you are probably tired of hearing me say that. So let's just continue to talk about it and what it means for the Broncos and why I believe it's screwing them over. The Broncos in particular have veterans on their team that are getting up there in age. I don't want to say old, but they're definitely not in their young, mid-20s. They're getting up there towards 30. And we have players that are coming off of severe injuries. So with those specific players, I'm sure rest is one of those advantages that they can use to not only receive treatment on whatever ailment or, prevention of another injury, but it also allows the team to gel, to take a step back, relax, and to let the bumps and bruises and the nicks kind of just roll right off of them before they get ready for the next week. Now, I know this is really tough to see, but this is kind of what the chart looks like. The Lions are at the top of the list with 13, all the way up there in the blue, and the Raiders are at the very bottom at -19. And everything in between is a week-by-week basis of kind of where each team sits. Now, where does net rest come from? Well, because I'm sure you're probably wondering yourself, okay, this all sounds like it's making a little bit of sense, but how does the NFL determine this? Well, it's all based off of primetime games. Obviously, the teams that get more primetime games have either a higher advantage or disadvantage. They're going to be closer towards the polls, either the top or the bottom. Whereas teams that have less primetime games, the Broncos only have 4, are going to be squeezed more towards the middle. So, with all that being said, and before we break down every single game on the Broncos schedule and where their net rest edge advantage comes in or disadvantage comes in, which Broncos game are you most concerned about in 2025? From a pure strength of schedule perspective, I'm thinking the Eagles in week 5 is probably the toughest game. But if we're talking about the main subject of this video, it's actually going to come the week after, which is our London game. So now let's talk about the NFL rest days for 2025. We're going to briefly go over every single team that has their net rest days and then kind of talk about where the Broncos sit. So let's start off with the Lions, who are clearly number 1 right now at plus 13. Then the Dolphins at plus 11. And then you kind of get this lumping of teams where the Cowboys, Chargers, Cardinals, and Seahawks are all kind of in the middle, plus 8 through plus 5. This is kind of where the majority of the NFL sits, is this plus 5 range. As you can see, there's the Ravens with plus 5. The Eagles sit at plus 4. The Giants and the Colts and the Bengals all at plus 3. And then you start to get down to 17 and 18, and you're starting to get into the more even split area. The Jaguars at plus 1. There's actually not a singular team that has a 0 score. It's plus or minus. The Falcons are the first team with -1. And there we are at tied for 23rd with the Steelers and the Bears at -4. And then this is where the teams with the least amount of net rest edge days are the Panthers, and then obviously the Saints and the Raiders just completely sit back at -14 and -19. Now, again, this doesn't mean everything, right? In fact, I have gone on record in previous videos that I have said before, and I've said, to me, rest is not overrated, but people buy into rest far more often than they should. If a team is gelling and a team is hot, I don't want the rest. I want to go into the next week with the momentum that I've already got. Controversially, or I don't think that's the right word. Conversely, I should say, take 2. If your team is injured or kind of on a low streak, then rest is obviously something that you can use to regroup and regather yourself. Now, before we take a look at the AFC West and how the Broncos can actually beat this negative rest advantage or disadvantage, I want you to start shopping with our friends over at Fanatics. This particular shirt right here is 25% off. It was originally $39.99 and is now $25.99. So you're getting $10 off, $35.99 to $25.99. It's 25% off, and you can use this link right here in the comments and description of today's video. Just go to chatsports.com/BroncosT to start shopping. But remember, it's not just t-shirts, it's jerseys, shirtsies, hats, and gloves, everything you need to gear up for the 2025 Denver Broncos season. All right, so the Broncos schedule. Let's go by a week-by-week basis here. Remember, this isn't cumulative. It is a week-by-week basis. So what you're looking at, it's a clean slate every single week. So obviously we start off pretty normal. Titans and Colts with 0. So we both come off of the same amount of bye days, the same amount of rest time. Then we actually have an advantage over the Chargers with +1. It goes back down to 0 and a regular schedule against the Bengals on Monday Night Football. This is kind of where we see it start to creep up on us. We lose 1 with the Eagles on week 5. Sets back to normal to go to London against the Jets. And then we have a -3 net rest edge against the Giants. So clearly coming back from London and the Giants being off of either a mini bye or an extended bye is hurting our chances. Not our chances, theoretically. It's hurting our rest time against the Giants. But it resets back in week 8. Then we actually have what I think to be a pretty decent stretch here. Of course, it's against the Chiefs that we would have the least amount of time with -4. But then we end out the season on a very positive note. It's all straight up from week 14 to week 17. And then we actually, because of the game on Thursday Night Football, have a huge rest advantage against the Chargers in week 18 with 3. So we start off strong. The middle gets kind of, okay, this is where you're going to have to play some hot football. And then we end again on an even playing field. So to me, this isn't great, but it's definitely not the worst. Now, the AFC West currently sits like this. The Chargers lead the AFC West in net rest days with +5, and the Raiders tanking down there at -19. What else is due? So when I look at this and I say, how does this affect the team's playoff advantage? because that's the next logical step. Well, does it really hurt in a way? If you look at what happened the last couple of years with negative rest days in the playoffs, so teams that had a negative rest advantage, like the Broncos do at -4, 6 out of 14 teams the last 2 years have made the playoffs. It's actually not correct. The percentage is supposed to be, flip-flopped because I just did the math wrong there. That's my fault. But essentially what you're looking at is it doesn't really matter heads or tails, which is why I believe the rest can kind of be overrated. However, it all depends on how well you're playing football. So let's go back and see how the Broncos can beat this negative rest edge disadvantage. Well, the first thing that you can do is put emphasis on your depth, right? If your depth pieces are playing well and you get a nice rotation of those depth pieces to come in and sub out for your starters from time to time and they're still giving you great production, that's one way that you can keep your starters healthy. On the flip side, you could prioritize your young players who are generally higher energy and better health, right? Their healing time is much faster the younger that you are. So if you can prioritize their growth and their development and keep them on the field longer, that's going to benefit your veterans. And then finally, something that I trust tremendously is Sean Payton's ability to coach smartly. Do not put your players, especially in practice, in a position where they're going to get hurt. Now, again, injuries are up in the air, right? You never know when one's going to happen. I mean, hell, you could walk onto the field, slip and fall, and tear your ACL. We actually saw it happen to Dre Greenlaw with his Achilles back in Super Bowl, I believe it was 58. So freak injuries happen all the time. But if you practice smart, you put the emphasis on your growth and development of your young players, and you prioritize the depth, all of these things can keep you healthy and keep your veterans healthy enough so that by the time that you get into this schedule where you have this negative rest advantage or disadvantage, then you can obviously power through that with the health that you've got on the field. Does that make sense? I know I'm kind of talking in circles. It's kind of something that I'm learning myself how to do or how to talk about because this is a newer metric. It only came out in the last couple of years. So everybody is still trying to figure out where the, advantages and disadvantages lie. I'll end you with this. What is your trust level in George Payton and Sean Payton with this team? Because that ultimately is what it comes down to, right? Do you trust your GM and do you trust your coach to put the best team forward and the best intentions for your team forward? I think right now it's obviously like an 8. That's where I would put it. Maybe an 8.5. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Kind of a crazy topic to talk about. However, I truly believe enough in this team that with the right practice schedule, with the right type of play, and with, God forbid, no injuries, this Denver Broncos team is gearing up for one hell of a 2025 season. My name is Moose. Until next time, be cool.